Hello everyone, this is Tony Byrne from Real Story Group. Welcome to this week's RSG webinar, Innovations in WCM Technology, What's Next? I'm really excited about this next half hour. A lot of fascinating things happening in the WCM, or Web Content and Experience Management space, aka Web CMS. Some new approaches to old problems and some new approaches to new opportunities. So I'm really excited to share some of our research with you. Innovation is a really interesting topic. It's obviously increasingly germane. And some of the things I'm going to be talking about are issues that this industry has faced for the last 15, even now going on 20 years. So some of the topics aren't new, but I believe some of the approaches are. So the other thing to mention is that some of these innovations are actually happening now among some vendors, although I think if the future is now, it's certainly distributed unevenly among the different vendors. But some of these innovations are taking place. Some are not taking place yet, but could be coming. And I think in some of these topics, I would argue that these are things that at RSG, among us, we would like to see the vendors do. So some of it is kind of aspirational. Things that, having talked to many of you as customers and seeing things that you need, these are innovations that we might wish for the marketplace. Whether they'll happen or not, obviously, is beyond our control. But there's really three things I'm going to key on in the next 20 minutes. First is authoring, the authoring environment, an important topic if you believe in content-oriented marketing. Vendors not paying a lot of attention to this right now, but I think we're still not cracking the code on making an effective authoring environment, and I'm going to describe why and where some innovation might come from. And then, of course, content strategy, really critical for success in digital, and how can the technology be better aligned with your content strategy. This whole notion of a headless CMS, kind of a controversial notion. I want to talk about what are some of the real benefits, but what are some of the things that are going to be needed to be successful. And then talking about segmentation, which is something that everyone wants to do, segmentation and personalization, but how that's going to have to be more practical to be more effective. And then finally, we'll talk about cloud, where I think most of the innovations are happening and will need to happen more around business models than necessarily than technology. And we'll close out the discussion talking about, are you ready? How ready are you to actually leverage this innovation, which I think is going to be a critical determinant in how successful you are. So, Jared, let's get into it. Slide 6, first talking about authoring. And here we'll go back to the good old WYSIWYG editing, the rich text editing experience. This, of course, has been around for at least 20 years, a source of great frustration, sometimes joy, but mostly frustration. We're at an interesting point in the marketplace where we have these older, but somewhat stable rich text editors like CK Editor, which you see here, TinyMCE, and then the generation of so-called HTML5 editors, some of which have been rather buggy and disappointing, and I think in some cases lacking maturity. So a lot of experimentation going on there, not necessarily a lot of innovation. Where we're seeing some innovation is taking some of these more old school rich text editors and extending them. So in this case, a systems integrator called Blend Interactive took the CK editor in EpiServer, and they added a couple of new icons there. The first one is that the magnifying glass actually isn't necessarily a search. It does search, but what it does is it helps you insert other content items from the repository right into your rich text environment. So that's really useful because sometimes you want to embed other content without copy pasting it. You want to do proper reuse. But you don't want to necessarily change your content model to have to do that. You want to be able on an ad hoc basis to embed other content. And the same thing there with the image editor, very interesting. It doesn't search the asset library in the WCM. It reaches out to external libraries where you may have images, and then uses the built-in Lucene search engine to search that image repository and add it in. So it's basically customizing this environment to give authors more control where they're authorized to do so. So that's definitely an innovation that we see happening, but although quite unevenly. The next slide, Jared, is around power user interfaces. This is a screenshot from Core Media. It could be any number of different tools. It's a 4-panel. Sometimes we see it's actually a 5-panel interface, clearly designed for power users. And this is where a lot of the user experiences are going, particularly at the high end of the WCM market, really oriented towards the professional digital publisher, someone who might be living in this platform all day long, and so they're going to invest a lot in training and education, really getting up to speed with it. The problem with these interfaces is they're enormously intimidating to someone who doesn't use the system all that often. And I would argue that these so-called casual contributors, they're still out there. It's still an important use case. And so the question is, how do you sort of serve both? And this is an area where there hasn't been so much innovation per se as more kind of bifurcation. So if you go to the next screen, Jared, the typical answer to this is to have a simple in-context editorial interface like you see here from Sitefinity. And that works pretty well for basic editors. Of course, when they need more sophisticated things, then this interface maybe doesn't work so well. If you go to the next screen, Jared, we're on slide 9 here. The simple editorial experience could also be forms-based, right? So it's a fairly simple forms-based interface. And so this is clearly, much simpler than what we just saw a couple screens back. The problem is that the industry kind of falls into 2 categories. One, the ones that have simpler interfaces like this, or the more complex interfaces like you saw with Core Media, and certainly Adobe and others would fall in that category. Or you have a single vendor that will give you 2 different interfaces, like one simple and one complicated.